Hello friend, welcome back to my channel KBS Technocraft. Today we are going to compare the different worker model for Azure functions. So when you are going to create a Azure function, it will allow you to create either isolated worker model, either in process model. These options are available in .NET 6.0 and .NET 8.0. So before we proceed further, we would create one Azure function and try to see what are the different in terms of code when it's generated by the template, and then what are the options are available for settings and build and deployment. Okay, so what I will do, I will open Visual Studio and then I will create a new project, right? And then I will select Azure function from template. I will click on next and then Azure function app, and then I will put isolated, and then we can put in any folder. I selected my code folder where I want to have it. So if you see here, you can see here .NET 8.0 isolated, right? So here you can see isolated, and also you can see uh, 8.0 in process. So if you select this, right, this where we are having a postfix call isolated, then it will consider the model as a isolated, where the text written here .NET 8.0, then it will be just a in process model. So let's first create a isolated, right? And then we will make it HTTP trigger, and authorization level is function. That's fine. We will create it. Right. Okay. So let me open one more instance of Visual Studio, and in that we will create in process model. So I will create a new project, and then I will select Azure function, click next, right? Azure function, and then I will put in process, right? And then I will place in same folder. Okay, so here I will select long term, this 8.0. So if you want to create Azure function with in process, then you isolate it, then you have to select isolated. And if you want to create Azure function with in process model, you have to select this. Okay, so I selected this, and I'll also make it HTTP trigger, and I will create it. So I'm just creating this. Okay, so let's build first one by one. And okay, so this is isolated, and I will try to build it. Okay, so the build is successfully happened. As I have mentioned here, I build it here. You can see this build is happening, and then I build other solution also. So we will try to first compare what are the code differences there and what is the configuration differences there. Then we'll compare what is advantage and disadvantage when we are using isolated and when we are using in process, right? So let's see that. So if you open your function.cs file, right, so in isolated mode you can see that here the logger is injected in this way, right? It's like in your API you will be injecting the logger information in your constructor. Also, what you can see, you can inject your dependencies here, right? In how you can inject your dependency in the REST API or web API, you can also inject your dependencies like here we have configured, right, app inside and telemetry services. You can inject if you have any third party services or repositories, you can inject it here, right, register it here. And then you can, once you register here your dependencies, you can basically inject here in your constructor, right? So that is one difference is there. So let me open the in process and you see the function. You can see that here is no constructor where you can inject it, right? You will have to uh, uh, you will not have that option for injecting that dependencies here, right? And also if you see the attributes here, you can see here function name will come, and there if you see in isolated it will come function, right? Function like this function. Okay, the runtime, how does it identify whether this is isolated or a .NET? So if you see function worker runtime in the local setting that JSON file, you will be able to see here .NET isolated. But in process, when you go that configuration, right, you will be able to see .NET. Okay, so let's now go in more detail and see that what is the difference between these two. Other than this code difference, we will see how what are the other differences are there. Okay, so basically there are 8 or 10 categories where we have compared it. So, for example, the major categories what we have considered it execution environment. So this is major difference between this. The execution environment, when you are using a a, a isolated worker model, then it will be isolated. But when you are using in process model, then runs within the same process as other functions. As you know that a Azure function can contain more than Azure function app can contain more than one functions, right? So in that case, if there are 10 Azure functions in a same Azure function app, then they will run under same process, right? Security, isolated has more security. I will go in more detail one by one, and the in-process model has the lower security with compared to isolated model. Resource management is a dedicated. For isolated, you need to have a dedicated resource for each functions. Here you can have a shared among all the function in the same process. Scalability is independently you can scale it, but here you have you cannot scale it individual function. You have to scale for the all the function running under that process. Performance, consistent and overhead, generally faster, but it can degrade with the contention. Similar way, language support is limited. That means it isolated model does not supported by all other languages. Most of the language it does not. Okay, it supports C sharp and some other language, but in process model is supported by a very wide range of language. Dependency management, you it can be isolated, but in process model it will be shared. Deployment for the in isolated worker model is a complex, but in process model is simple because all functions are deployed together. Okay, let's see when to use it. Use cases, basically when you are having securities are more concerned and you are having multi-tenant scenario, you should go for isolated worker model. In other scenario, you can go for the in-process model. So let's go in more detail one by one. The execution environment, as we have mentioned, the isolated worker model in each in that Azure function, each function runs its own isolated environment, separate from other function. This ensures that the execution of the one function does not impact or affect to other function. In process model, if Azure function contains multiple if Azure function app contains multiple Azure functions, in that case, if one function start, you know, start troubling or is creating problem or is getting more memories, then the other function can misbehave. And it also can impact other Azure functions, right? Security, isolated worker model offers higher security due to isolation of each function. This isolation reduces the risk of cross function, you know, contamination and or interference. In process model, security is lower because all the functions share the same environment. A vulnerability in one function can compromise other. Resource management, isolated worker model. Each function is allocated its own resources, preventing resource contention and ensuring consistent performance. In process model, basically all the resources are shared among all the functions which are part of that Azure function apps. Okay. Scalability, isolated worker model, basically each function can scale independently as is run in the isolated mode. But in process model, if Azure function app is having 10 Azure function, then the scalability will be applicable for complete entire process, not individual Azure functions. Okay. Performance, uh, isolated worker model performance is consistent due to dedicated environment through though there are many slight overhead due to isolation. Okay. In process model, generally faster as functions share the same process, but performance can degrade if the process is overloaded. Right. Language support, isolated worker model typically support a limited set of languages like .NET Core, Java, Python, and Node.js due to the need of independent runtime management. But in process model support broader range of language, making more flexible different programming environments. Okay. Dependency management, basically in isolated worker model, dependencies are managed separately for each function, avoiding conflicts and allowing greater flexibility. In process model, basically the dependencies are shared across functions, which can lead conflict and require carefully management of the dependencies. Deployment, isolated worker model deployment is more complex at each as a, in the a same Azure function app you can have a more than one Azure functions which may require a different deployment configuration. But in process model, if you are having 10 function under same Azure function app, then it has to deploy together. Okay. Cold start times can be longer due to the need to initialization of separate environment for each function. But in process model, cold start time are generally shorter, leading to the faster response time, especially for infrequent traffics. Right. So, use cases where we use it, as I have mentioned, that for isolated worker model we should use whenever you are writing a Azure function where its security are major concerns, right? And also when the multi-tenant applications are there or scenarios are there, right? In process model, basically is suitable for simpler scenario where multi-tenant kind of requirement is not there and security is not that much required because of this internal application are going to consume these Azure functions. Uh, in those kind of scenario, we should go for the in-process model.